Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are across the globe. Great to be with you for our 74th Sudden Arrhythmia Death Syndrome Foundation, the SADS Foundation live program. I'm Mike Ackerman, genetic cardiologist at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and director of Mayo Clinic's Winland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic and its complementary Winland Smith Rice Sudden Death Genomics Laboratory. Today, I'm here on behalf of Alice Laura, the CEO and president of the SADS Foundation, and we're so glad you chose to join us live, wherever you are, or you'll be watching this on tape, or whenever you hit the YouTube, Facebook, whatever mechanism play button. Last week was incredibly exciting for me as we closed out September for your questions and answers. The questions were riveting. I hope the answers were decent, but you really had me on my toes, and there were so many of them that came through that we thought we would do it again on this first day of the new month. Happy October 1 to you all. And again, we've now entered October. October is not only Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, it is Sudden Cardiac Arrest Awareness Month. So SCA, Sudden Cardiac Arrest Awareness Month. And we're kicking it off with your questions today. And I'm looking forward to seeing who's here joining us already and what questions that you might have for me. Before we do those questions, just a reminder where we are in the state of COVID-19 pandemic, all things AC after Corona. Worldwide, there's 234 million cases, 4.78 million COVID-19 associated deaths. Good news, 6.25 billion individuals have received at least one dose of the vaccine. In the United States, we're at 43.5 million cases, so about 1 out of every 6 COVID-19 cases is in the US. 697,920 deaths. Encouraging, it looks like we might be coming down this fourth surge from the Delta variant. There were 837,000 cases in the United States last week, down from 1.15 million the first week of September, and down from the highest ever, which was 1.7 million cases, twice as many, which was registered the first of the year, January 10th, largely pre-vaccination. The vaccines work. Get the vaccine. Which one? Whichever. They all work. Moderna's, Pfizer's, Johnson & Johnson. Very important to get vaccinated if you're eligible. The Pfizer booster is available for those who need the booster by age over 65 or by being immunocompromised. And so get the booster. Some encouraging news, wasn't there today already? Merck released an interim analysis of their antiviral drug, their oral drug. I can't even say the name, molnupiravir or something like that. 50% reduction of hospitalization deaths was the interim signal. So that's encouraging news from Merck. I own no stock in Merck. I'm just sharing you the news of the COVID-19 day. So get the vaccine. 55% of Americans have been fully vaccinated. That's not a great number. So we certainly would like that to be 80 to 90% territory. So that's your COVID-19 update. And Sudden Cardiac Arrest Awareness Month is the month we're in. There's a link here from Aaron about all activities that we're starting to do. And you're not going to want to miss next week's program. We're going to get together 2 weeks in a row, 3 weeks in a row. Wow, good for me. I love being with you. And I think that we should have some really neat interviews of some sudden cardiac arrest survivors and hear their stories. So let's get involved this month of sudden cardiac arrest awareness. Well, with that, we've got 35 minutes on the counter as I see. Greetings to Jean and Christine and Sonia, those who reveal yourselves. I'm glad, Dana, you watched last week's recording, so you can be live or you can get it whenever it works. And the first question comes about sertraline. And it says, and you're not short on your questions, but I'll do my best to glance over here and go through my multifocals or whatever they are. I have been on sertraline. That's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRI. I think the trade name for sertraline is Zoloft, used for anxiety and depression. And this person had a Holter. Cardiologist saw some bottom chamber beats, PVCs, placed her on metoprolol. That's a beta blocker. 5 months later, the QT of 590 was noted on the chart. I've been on the sertraline for years with many EKGs, none showing it. Could this be just from the sertraline? So really good question. We have congenital long QT syndrome, which affects about 1 in 2,000 people. But then we have way more drug-induced QT prolongation individuals, disease-associated QT prolongation from a variety of diseases, electrolyte-mediated QT prolongation from low body potassium and low body magnesium. So yes, there's way more cases of a drug, a QT prolonging drug, causing drug-induced or acquired QT prolongation, as opposed to those with this 1 in 2,000 disorder called congenital long QT syndrome. So it could be just the sertraline, although that number, a QTC of 590, if accurate, that's quite long for just sertraline all by itself. So what I would be doing is making sure, do I believe that QTC number, or is it a mistake? Has it been measured incorrectly? If it is QTC truth, then I'd want to know, was there anything else going on present at the time besides the sertraline medication? Did the person happen to be sick, under the weather, vomiting, diarrhea, low body potassium? And if I can't find any additional reasons, and the only thing I have to blame is sertraline at that number for the QT, I actually would consider getting ECGs on the first-degree relatives, parents, siblings, children, first-degree relatives, and even consider doing congenital long QT syndrome genetic testing. Really good question to start our first day of October. Evan has a question and wondering about my thoughts on SCN5A mutations and their prognostic value in Brugada. So for those of you with Brugada syndrome, you know that there have been many genes published and implicated in Brugada syndrome. 23 is the number, and I guess I need to do it that way. 23 is the number, but standing the test of time has been the very first Brugada gene, SCN5A, which builds the protein called the NAV1.5 sodium channel of the heart. And true Brugada causing mutations in that gene cause loss of function to that sodium channel. And that explains roughly 20% of all Brugada syndrome. And does the mutation within that gene have prognostic value, meaning predicting whether you're more likely to have a Brugada triggered episode or less likely? And the answer is, yeah, a little. Not really enough to make a big deal of, but those mutations that are complete loss of function, such that the person has a 50% reduction in the sodium channel, might have a slightly higher risk of events than those that damage the sodium channel less. And that's the Brugada question to start. And Natalie, oh, hi, Natalie. Do I have a preferred drug for folks who have anxiety? I know most SSRIs are on the do not take list for a long QT patient. I love the question, Natalie, and it's a really important one. I'm not giving direct medical advice. I never do, to anybody who I haven't personally seen and I'm not called their physician, but some general observations. First, there certainly is and are plenty of patients with real long QT syndrome, real Brugada syndrome, real CPVT, who also are struggling with concomitant anxiety and depression for a variety of reasons. Some of the anxiety, depression related to their disease journey, some having nothing to do with their genetic heart condition. And for far too long, we've had families and patients struggling with their mental health, having their mental health suboptimally treated or not treated at all out of QT fear, because it's on the hit list of drugs to avoid. It's a very good list of medicines provided by www.crediblemeds.org. This is maintained by its president, Ray Woosley, great scientist, great gentleman. I'm on the board, scientific advisory board for that. But that list is a great guide. But for me, it is not a mandatory do not take list. It is a think carefully about it. Never take it without reviewing that medicine and that situation with your QT specialist. Never. And so I do view that those prescription medicines, that all long QT patients should do a timeout as one of the QT relevant preventative measures. That timeout being, is that prescription that you just typed or wrote, is it QT safe? If it's on that list, there better be a great reason to take that medicine. Having said that, I have many patients who are taking one medication or more that finds itself on that QT drug hit list. And the single most common class are the SSRIs, are my patients who are struggling with anxiety and depression. So I partner very closely with their mental health specialists. I don't have my favorite anxiety drug or depression drug. What instead I ask is for you and that mental health specialist to come up with your strategy as if from their experience, what's the best drug that they have the most confidence in therapeutic efficacy to treat your situational depression, anxiety, what have you, and then review that best choice with me and see if we think that there's enough QT safety margin to do it. And almost always the answer has been yes. I much prefer that than the psychiatrist, he or she, picking what they think is the QT friendliest drug, even though they don't even like it from a therapeutic benefit standpoint, and then thinking that we're doing you a favor. So it's a tag team with your mental health professional, but we think we can do this very well. And it's critical for us to treat all of you, not just your heart. That's relatively easy, I must say, but treat all of you so that you live and thrive. And Christine, oh, wow, these are like amazing number of questions coming in already. You guys are on fire. So, Christine's regarding genetic testing, shifting to the disease CPVT, does a VUS mean that the variant has never been documented before? Ooh, I love it. VUS, variant of uncertain significance, is a label that the genetic test company assigns to its variant when they don't have enough data to call it pathogenic or call it a nothing burger or likely benign. Now, remember, the VUS is the grade that the genetic test company, give it. That may not be the grade that I, the specialist, assign to it. In other words, in particular with CPVT, so many of the RYR2 genetic test results, which is the most common CPVT gene, get labeled a VUS because there's just not enough data to elevate that variant on its own to a CPVT causative pathogenic variant. We showed this, we published this. And the key there is they may be stuck calling it a VUS, but let's say I was taking care of a patient, and before I ordered her genetic test, I said to the patient, you have CPVT. Your stress test, your story looks like CPVT. And now I order the genetic test and it comes back with a variant, a rare variant in the RYR2 gene, the CPVT gene that explains 2/3 of all CPVT. Company might have had to call that a VUS, but I don't. That is almost without a doubt the disease causative mutation. So the genetic test company's grade that they give a variant is just the starting point. It may or may not stay stuck in that ambiguous designation. Kelsey's, what do I recommend an LQT2 patient put on their medical ID bracelet? Medical ID bracelet, should you have them? Yeah, if you want them. About half of all of my families probably get a bracelet, whether it's long QT 1, 2, 3, Brugada. And in this case, what I like you to put on it, if you choose to get a bracelet, is long QT syndrome. And it doesn't really have to be LQT2, but long QT syndrome, second line, shock me. And the reason I do that is keep it simple, silly, is I want the paramedic first responder to see the disease. And if they're not totally sure what that disease is, seeing shock me is going to make them locked and loaded into what they need to be doing in their resuscitation drill. Long QT syndrome, shock me. That's all you need on the medical bracelet. Samantha's giving a comment. Hi, Samantha. John's question on a family in Ireland has long QT syndrome, can't get life insurance. And you can work with us at SADS Foundation to see what help there is, but it's a challenge. Just put it out there that if you've been diagnosed with long QT syndrome, your life insurance status can be a challenge. In the United States, we have the genetic non-discrimination law passed a few years ago, but that law did not cover life insurance. And so often in these evaluations, when you're early on, I recommend that you make sure you have your house in order, that you look into life insurance if that's what you want, and so forth, before you need to say you have a pre-existing. Now, if you have a defibrillator because you've already had cardiac arrest, it doesn't really matter the name of the disease. Your life insurance is going to be a challenge to get. The premium's going to be very high. Where I go to battle against the life insurance companies is if all you have is genetic positive substrate, meaning you did variant testing, we found that you have the mutation, you own the pathogenic variant, but you've never had a symptom. Your ECG would not even tell me that you have long QT syndrome. I will work really hard to make the case to that insurance company that that is genetic discrimination. And even though not covered by the GINA, the law, we will fight that hard, and we have won. So go to battle and never give up on that. Is syncope, fainting during fever, a symptom of Brugada? And the answer is it could be. Now remember, fainting itself is a very common symptom. About 25% of all humans will faint before their 25th birthday. Now that faint that those humans can have, I'm one of them, is a very different faint. It's a normal faint. It's a woozy, lightheaded, dizzy, vision's closing. I probably should get down, sit down, and I didn't kind of faint. That's different than the arrhythmic faint where, bam, all of a sudden the person collapses with almost no forewarning. And we know in Brugada syndrome that a sudden faint during the setting of high body temperature from fever, for example, could be the fever what set off the Brugada danger rhythm. And so that's one of the reasons why one of the Brugada preventative measures is if get temperature, if get fever, lower fever promptly. It's not spooky, like urgent lowering. It's just do it. Take your antipyretic, your acetaminophen, Tylenol, your ibuprofen, your whatever favorite fever lowering medication. Jessica's asking a really important question. We are anxiously awaiting COVID vaccines for the 5 and older, 5 years to 11, because as you know, Pfizer's is approved for 12 and older. Would LQT1 or any other genetic condition improve access to the vaccines? Could this be considered high risk and bump into the front of the line? Great question, Jessica. No, absolutely no, no way, no how. And this is good news. In other words, none of these genetic heart conditions are high risk conditions for a bad SARS-CoV-2 infection outcome. None of them. So there may be high risk conditions, immunocompromised individuals after transplant or whatever, but being diagnosed with one of our conditions that the SADS Foundation supports is not a high risk condition. You should not seek an exemption because of long QT not supported. You should not try to get to the front of the line because of long QT. Not a high risk condition. This has been good news because early on we actually wondered whether somebody with long QT syndrome might be more vulnerable to having the viral infection trigger their long QT and create their long QT explosion of sudden fainting, sudden seizing, or sudden ceasing. But that has not happened. We have not seen that in our program, thousands of patients. We have not seen that in the SADS Foundation. Globally, there is no signal that has emerged where getting infected with the virus has irritated the long QT, the Brugada, the CPVT. Love the question. It's a really important one, Jessica. So thank you for providing that. But I hope I made that completely, unambiguously crystal clear. Carla, oh, thanks, Carla. That's sweet of you. Let's see if there's a question too. I'm Carla's hero. I love that. In the United Kingdom, it is unusual to get access to an ICD unless they are a high risk or have a cardiac arrest. Is that the same in the US, or are we being neglected slightly? Actually, Carla, I think you're doing way better on that side of the pond. Way too many long QT patients in the United States are getting implanted with defibrillators way too quickly. Most patients with long QT syndrome do not need and should not receive an ICD. So in this case, I think the UK has it right. Who gets a defibrillator in my program with long QT? Super high risk where I'm just not confident in the treatment program, or already declared the horse is out of the barn, I think is the expression, sudden cardiac arrest survivor. Now, there's even one group of, yes, I did my sudden cardiac arrest where I would not have to go straight to a defibrillator. And that's if you did sudden cardiac arrest when you were undiagnosed and therefore untreated, and then found to have LQT1. Because in that substrate, we can become really, really confident in a non-defibrillator treatment strategy. So my friends in the UK and my dear friend and fellow genetic cardiologist Elijah Bear in London, they've got the ICD formula way better than we do in the United States. Way too many defibrillators being planted in the United States. Melissa, her son, speaking of LQT1, is 10 and has that. His QTC is 480, wondering, will this change? What will happen going through puberty? He's had no symptoms, plays football. They have the external defibrillator as the safety gear, and he's on Nadolol. Well, way to go. You are doing all of the right things. You have the automatic external defibrillator, and as part of Sudden Cardiac Arrest Awareness Month, that AED is a life-saving gadget. But in my patients with long QT syndrome, yes, they have it, but they're never going to need it, almost never. We've had 4 AED rescue shocks in 4 of over 650, 700 treated children in these last 20 years. Now, for your son with LQT1, age 10, he will actually be transitioning into a lower risk window of time, because we know that in males after puberty, with the arrival of testosterone, the testosterone might bring other things into your lives, but it lowers the risk of an LQT1 event. And so that QT number of 480 might decrease during the transition to puberty, but being asymptomatic for 10 years and on the right beta blocker of Nadolol, you all are doing a great job. Aaron's wondering, are inverted T waves common in long QT syndrome? Well, we published this looking at the non-QT ECG profile of long QT syndrome. And in that paper, we showed that T wave inversion, sort of upside down T waves in the precordial leads, V1, V2, V3, those, is actually fairly common. And it's more common in LQT type 2 individuals. Why? We don't know the why. Why are the T waves upside down or inverted in LQT2 with some frequency? Samantha has an FLNC mutation, and that is a gene that encodes filamin C, a protein, so not a channelopathy, that gives rise to one of what we call the arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathies, and just got the AED and got tested, and so doing very well. So I'm glad to hear that update. And Eve is asking about monoclonals, and do monoclonals, and I'm assuming the monoclonal antibodies for COVID-19, do they prolong the QT? Good news, no, they don't. In fact, there are none of the COVID-19 therapies currently used have a QT prolonging signal to them. So that's really, really encouraging news. I can't honestly say about that new drug from Merck that I mentioned at the start of the show, that oral antiviral drug, but I suspect we would have known its QT signal from the early studies. But since that drug just came out, I can't verify the lack of a QT signal with that oral antiviral drug, but I bet it's QT clean. Melissa is wondering about the vaccine for COVID for a 10-year-old boy. Makes me nervous hearing about the heart inflammation or whatever was happening. I shared that concern and the anxiety, Melissa, and because there's been so much fake news or false news or misnews surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine associated myocarditis or heart muscle inflammation in kids, in adolescents, particularly the adolescent males more than the adolescent females, and in the age range that we've seen, say 15 to 22. Is there a signal? Yeah, there's a signal. There is vaccine associated myocarditis, perhaps more with Moderna than with Pfizer. Perhaps I'm still waiting for a good confirmation of that, but there's a signal. But what is that signal? Wimpy. We're talking probably a 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 50,000 adolescent male risk. That's low. And I think many of those cases have been over-reported with the label of myocarditis when it's really been kind of wimpy symptoms, not bringing them to the hospital, not bringing them to the intensive care unit. So we're not talking scary vaccine-associated myocarditis in most. And whatever we're going to call that vaccine reaction, it's 1 in 5,000 at the highest number, and that number is going to drift to a much smaller number. So for your 10-year-old boy, if and when we see the approval have made it to the 5 to 12-year-olds, and I'm anticipating we're going to see that approval first for the drug from Pfizer, the vaccine, in the next 3 months. Would I have any concern if I had a 10-year-old child? No, I wouldn't, not for that side effect. I honestly am still wrestling on the risk-benefit calculus that whatever is the side effect package in that age range, it better be super low, because the risk of the virus doing a nasty in that age range is super, super low. So we have to weigh the risks and the benefits and see which we conclude wins, but I would not hesitate to get the vaccine out of this vaccine heart inflammation side effect concern. Not that spooky at all. I guess we're in Halloween month with October. I've said spooky more than once. Sherry, oh my, I thought I was caught up, and then you just nailed another 12 questions I see. Okay. We might know what we're going to do the next time again. But not next week, because next week you're not going to want to miss the program. Tell your friends. I get to interview some heroes, some sudden cardiac arrest survivors, and I think you will be gripped by those stories. Okay, we have 10 minutes on the counter. Let's see what's next. Sherry's 10-year-old LQT3 is on Nadolol. Oh, wow, 80 milligrams. I must say that's a whopper dose, but I'm again not going to make any specific, but I'm just noting that number is a large number for a 10-year-old. Has requested to skip to stay inside for recess because it gets hot easily in Texas. This because of the medication. He gets tired very quickly when playing. Yes, I think probably not the heat, but all I can say, having read the whole question, is there's a good chance that there could be a component of beta blocker fatigue going in. I'm not going to speak about whether it's the right dose, Sherry, for your 10-year-old. I can only tell you I take care of about 1,400 patients with long QT syndrome. And the number of those 1,400 who are taking 80 milligrams of Nadolol or more is probably counted on 2 hands, 10 fingers out of those 1,400 patients. So in my view, that's a stiff dose. And I'd have to be figuring out and wondering, why am I feeling I need to be on that much medication? It could be a good reason, but that's a big dose. Tandra, thanks for endorsing that strategy that we talked about. Yes, Evan. So each mutation can damage the biology of the sodium channel differently. And those that cause the greatest loss of function to it statistically are more likely to predispose the person to a higher chance of events. But I really won't spend much time on that, because the single strongest risk factor, of course, in Brugada syndrome is, have you already had sudden cardiac arrest? And that's not that helpful because you've already declared yourself. Then it is, have I fainted in a way that I don't like? If I don't like your faint, that's a strong warning of far stronger prognostic factor than what kind of sodium channel mutation you have. And then the other one is, does my Brugada pattern, my type 1 Brugada ECG pattern, show itself every ECG I get? Or does it come and go and is transient? Those that are spontaneously there and always there, that person's at higher risk of a Brugada episode. Again, much stronger of a risk factor than what kind of sodium channel mutation you have. And Lisa's asking, what can I take for a hiatal hernia? I have long QT type 1 on 160 milligrams of propranolol. Doctor told me not to take omeprazole. Any advice? General, not for you, but in general, I guess I'm assuming that the hiatal hernia in somebody might be resulting in some potential for peptic ulcer disease or reflux, for which normally the doctor might have wanted you to be on a proton pump inhibitor like omeprazole. And all I can say is I have many patients with long QT syndrome who are on omeprazole. Is omeprazole a proton pump inhibitor on the www.crediblemeds.org list or qtdrugs.org or on the SADS website linked to the QT drugs list? Yes. Why is it on the list? It's not a direct QT prolonging drug. Instead, omeprazole, when taken chronically, can lower your body magnesium, and low body magnesium can secondarily stretch the QT interval. So in my patients who are on omeprazole, We're on it. We check their magnesium levels every 3 months or so. And if those are drifting lower, then we add a magnesium supplement. Never have had a meprazole or a proton pump inhibitor triggered or associated activation of their long QT. So I think we can do this very safely if that's the right drug to treat your non-heart health issue. Angie's asking about swimming being considered a trigger in type 8 long QT syndrome. And I think we have a whole long list now for our next visit together, because I see we have 5 minutes on the counter. So type 8 long QT syndrome, for those of you who are that, about 3 to 4% of all of my long QT families have type 8 long QT syndrome. That's due to mutations in the calcium channel. We don't mention that very often, do we? That's because it's 3% of all long QT syndrome. It is in 4th place as the 4th most common genetic subtype of long QT syndrome. And certain calcium channel mutations just give you long QT syndrome. That's LQT8. Other calcium channel mutations, most classically the G406R, G-glycine 406, the number, R-arginine, gives rise to the full head-to-toe syndrome of Timothy syndrome. And so in patients who have either Timothy syndrome or just the LQT8, there's no evidence from these numbers, and they're smaller, about swimming being uniquely irritating. And that's in contrast to the stronger association behind swimming as being more irritating to the heart with LQT1, for example. And even saying that, do I have swimmers with LQT1 who stay swimming? Yes. In fact, I have a potential Olympic swimmer with LQT1, and she thinks she's going to make the Summer Olympics 24 in Paris. And I wish her well. But as to LQT8, I don't think we have any reason to think that swimming would be uniquely irritating. Let's see. I'm just glancing to see if I can do one in the time that we have. And let's take this one. I don't think I've ever taken a question from Wendy, and I just saw it. And then Aaron and the team, they're going to archive these other ones, and we can bring them up on our next question and answer session, just like they brought up several of the ones to kick today off. So on the counter, and Wendy, welcome to SADS Live. I don't know if this is your first time or a first time where I've noticed your name. She's asking, is 461 milliseconds for the QTC number too high for a female? I love that question, because your question is one of the most misunderstood questions, even among heart rhythm doctors. In other words, what's the normal QTC? And when is the normal range and the disease range overlapping, and how do I make sense of everything? So by itself, for example, Wendy, if I met an adult woman, never a symptom, no story, no family history, no nothing, and her ECG shows a QTC of 461, she almost for sure does not have long QT syndrome. On the other hand, if I see a woman where we already know long QT syndrome is present in her sister, for example, and she gets her ECG, the sister, before the genetic test result comes back, and it's 461, what's her chance of having long QT syndrome? Same number. It's actually 50% chance, because now we have genetic insight that's already changing the odds. So 461, the real answer is it too long? It depends. In health and in screening programs, 461 is still well within the range of normal. So a healthy young woman like you, Wendy, 461 is above the average. For women, the average QTC is about 420, but the 99th percentile boundary is at 480. So 461 is still well within the normal range, even though it's at the upper limits of normal. On the other hand, my long QT patients with a proven mutation, 1,400 plus of you all out there, their average QTC among all of them is 470 milliseconds. So we have to carefully interpret the data, whether it's an ECG data point or whether it's a genetic test result data point, or whether it's sizing up what kind of faint did you or did you not have. So Wendy, I hope I did justice to your first question to SADS Live. And for all of you, we hit the top of the hour because I just heard the Mayo Clinic announcement about the availability of the vaccine in Phillips Hall, which we hear at Mayo Clinic every hour starting at 7 a.m. So if you haven't heard that availability and you have not yet been vaccinated, get your COVID-19 vaccine. Well, that's a wrap for our 74th SADS Facebook Live program. I hope you will have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. I had a great week since I saw you last. Think about it. Baylor University won. They're undefeated in football, 4-0. Sunday, the Vikings won. My Vikings won. And my granddaughter turned 20 months old. And so I had a great week, but I'm looking forward to an even better weekend. And then we come back together next Friday, October 8th, for a very special program as we are now in Sudden Cardiac Arrest Awareness Month. So until next week, stay well, stay safe, stay corona-free, get the vaccine. Blessings to all of you.